Carl Jung identified 8 signs of an extremely rare personality type, and if you recognize even half of these traits, you're part of what I call the psychological elite. In his decades of research, Jung discovered that less than 5% of the population develops what he termed differentiated consciousness, a way of experiencing reality that most people never achieve. But here's what's fascinating. These rare individuals often spend their entire lives thinking something is wrong with them. Jung documented case after case of people with extraordinary psychological depth who had been convinced by society that their intensity, their sensitivity, their refusal to accept shallow answers were character flaws rather than signs of exceptional mental sophistication. The most shocking part, Jung realized these rare personalities aren't just different, they're evolutionarily advanced. They represent humanity's next stage of consciousness development. Join me as we descend into the depths of Jungian psychology to uncover these 8 definitive signs of rare personality types. If you recognize yourself in these patterns, everything you've been told about being too much will finally make sense, because you're not too much for the world. The world is too little for you. Because here's what Jung discovered that modern psychology still refuses to acknowledge. The traits that make you feel like an outsider aren't defects, they're upgrades. You're not broken, you're breakthrough. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But what if who you truly are doesn't fit into society's narrow definitions of normal? What if your intensity, your depth, your refusal to settle for surface-level existence are evidence of what I call advanced psychological architecture? Think about this from an evolutionary perspective. Throughout history, the individuals who pushed humanity forward were the ones who couldn't accept the status quo. They were the ones who questioned everything, felt everything, and saw possibilities that others couldn't even imagine. But here's the tragic irony. Society teaches these exceptional individuals to suppress their greatest strengths. You've probably been told you're too sensitive, too intense, or too complicated. But Jung understood that these supposed flaws are actually signs of what he called psychological differentiation, the rare ability to perceive and process reality at levels most people never develop. Modern neuroscience is finally catching up to Jung's insights. Dr. Elaine Aron's research on highly sensitive people shows that approximately 20% of the population has nervous systems that process sensory information more deeply. But Jung identified something even rarer. Individuals whose entire psychological structure operates at an advanced level. But that's not the most extraordinary part. The most extraordinary part is that these rare personalities often hide their gifts because they've been taught to see them as burdens. You've learned to dim your light because others find it threatening. Let me reveal the first sign of what I call psychological rarity. Sign 1. You experience emotional depth that feels almost supernatural. Jung discovered something remarkable about emotional intensity. He found that certain individuals don't just feel emotions. They experience what he called affection-toned complexes that create profound psychological resonance. You don't just have feelings. Feelings move through you like symphonies, each one carrying layers of meaning that others can't access. Here's what Jung realized that most therapists miss. This isn't emotional instability. It's emotional sophistication. When you feel deeply, you're not overreacting. You're accessing what Jung called the objective psyche, layers of human experience that most people have learned to suppress. You feel the unspoken tension in rooms before anyone says a word. You carry the emotional undercurrents of every interaction because your psyche is wired for depth, not surface-level pleasantries, Jung wrote. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But for you, Everything illuminates pathways to understanding that others can't even see. Sign 2. You question reality with what I call sacred curiosity. According to Jung, most people live what he called unconscious lives. They accept social programming without examination. But you can't help but dig deeper. Jung would have recognized you as someone with an active thinking function that refuses to accept surface explanations. You don't just ask what, you ask why. Why do people stay in relationships that diminish them? Why do we accept systems that don't serve human flourishing? Why do we pretend that shallow conversations constitute meaningful connection? Jung called this the transcendent function, the psychological ability to see beyond current limitations. While others accept the status quo, you're already envisioning what could be different, what could be more authentic, what could honor the full spectrum of human potential. But here's what I've discovered about people like you. Your questions threaten others' comfortable illusions. When you ask deep questions, you're not just seeking answers. You're challenging the psychological defenses that keep people feeling safe in their limitations. If you've ever been told you ask too many questions or think too deeply about things, comment, "My curiosity is sacred." Sign 3. You've developed what I call conscious independence. Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." You've learned to do exactly this, not by choice, but by psychological necessity. According to Jung's research, rare personalities often develop what he called individuated consciousness earlier than others, usually through adversity. Here's what Jung understood that most people miss. Your independence isn't a defensive mechanism. It's an achievement. You've learned through experience that depending on others for your sense of worth is psychological quicksand. So, you built yourself from the ground up. You stood up, often alone, and created an identity that couldn't be taken away by someone else's opinion or absence. Jung called this process individuation, the psychological journey toward becoming whole. Most people never complete this journey because it requires facing what Jung termed the shadow. All the parts of yourself you've been taught to reject. Your solitude isn't loneliness. It's sanctuary. It's where you remember who you are beneath all the roles and expectations. Jung believed this self-knowledge is the foundation of all psychological health. Sign 4. You possess what I call hyperpive awareness. Jung revolutionized psychology when he identified intuition as a legitimate psychological function. He said, "Intuition is perception via the unconscious that brings forth ideas, images, possibilities, ways out of a blocked situation by a process that is mostly unconscious." You don't just observe people. You read their psychological signatures. You notice micro-expressions, energy shifts, the words they don't say. Jung would have recognized this as evidence of what he called active imagination, the ability to perceive beyond the obvious. When someone says they're fine, but their entire energetic field screams distress, you can't unsee it. When there's tension in a room that everyone else seems to ignore, you feel it in your bones. This isn't paranoia. It's psychological sensitivity operating at a level that most people never develop. But Jung warned that if you don't learn to protect this sensitivity, it will exhaust you. You end up becoming an unconscious therapist for everyone around you, regulating conversations and carrying pain that isn't yours to carry. Sign 5. You crave meaning over everything else. Jung observed, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But what if being true to yourself means rejecting everything society tells you to want?" Jung discovered that certain personalities are psychologically incapable of living inauthentic lives. You don't choose meaning over popularity. Your psyche demands it. You've probably tried living for external validation, following scripts, playing expected roles. But Jung would have recognized the symptoms immediately. That knowing emptiness, that sense of betraying something essential, that quiet desperation beneath any applause. According to Jung, when you live against your psychological type, you don't just feel uncomfortable, you develop what he called neurotic symptoms. Your psyche literally rebels against inauthenticity. You can't pretend that shallow goals matter. You can't get excited about achievements that lack substance. You can't build relationships based on convenience rather than connection. Your psychological makeup won't allow it. But Jung identified something remarkable about people who prioritize meaning. They become what I call evolutionary catalysts for human consciousness. When you refuse to settle for less than authentic connection, you force others to confront their own inauthenticity. Sign 6. You've outgrown people and environments repeatedly. Jung said, "The greatest tragedy of the family is the unlived lives of the parents." But what happens when you refuse to live an unlived life? Jung discovered something profound about psychological growth. It's often a solitary journey. You've likely experienced the painful realization that people who once knew you don't anymore. Not because you've become difficult, but because you've shed layers of conditioning that no longer serve you. Jung called this process psychological death and rebirth. The friends who knew you when you were shrinking, when you were people-pleasing, when you were suppressing your truth, they remember that version of you. Sometimes they want that version back because it felt safer, more predictable. But you can't go back. Jung understood that psychological evolution is irreversible. Once you've seen behind the curtain of social conditioning, you can't return to unconscious conformity. If people seem uncomfortable with your growth and keep asking you to be who you used to be, comment, "My evolution is not negotiable." Sign 7. You create what I call transformational presence. Jung said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." But what if you're the type of person who creates transformation simply by showing up authentically? Jung identified a rare quality that some people possess, the ability to create what he called psychological holding space. When someone speaks to you, they feel seen in a way that's uncommon. You don't just listen to words. You perceive underlying emotional states. You don't offer quick fixes. You offer deep witnessing. You don't rush to judgment. You create space for truth to emerge. Jung understood that this level of presence is actually a form of psychological healing. But here's what I've observed about people with this gift. They often exhaust themselves by giving it too freely. You become so skilled at holding space for others that you forget to ask for space to be held yourself. Jung discovered something important about highly empathetic personalities. They often develop what I call helper syndrome, a pattern of unconscious self-sacrifice that ultimately serves no one. The work isn't to stop caring. The work is to learn discernment. Sign 8. You sense a purpose that can't be defined yet. Jung said, "Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." If you feel a persistent sense that you're meant for something more than the ordinary, Jung would have recognized this as what he called the transcendent function. Your psyche's drive toward individuation and purpose. You feel it. That restless knowing that you have something to contribute, something to build, something to express. It might not be clear yet, but it's undeniable. Jung understood this as evidence of what he called creative potential-seeking expression. This isn't about fame or recognition. It's about alignment, the psychological necessity of living in harmony with your deepest nature. Jung found that people who ignore this calling often develop neurotic symptoms, anxiety, depression, a sense of meaninglessness. But here's Jung's most profound insight about purpose-driven personalities. Your calling isn't just personal, it's transpersonal. You're not just here to fulfill yourself. You're here to serve the evolution of consciousness itself. Jung spent his entire career studying personalities like yours. He called people with these traits what I term the differentiated individuals, those who have developed psychological complexity that allows them to see, feel, and understand at levels most people never reach. But Jung also identified the stages of development for rare personalities. Understanding where you are in this process is crucial for your continued growth. Stage 1. The unconscious outsider. You feel different, but don't understand why. You experience the traits, but see them as problems to be fixed rather than gifts to be developed. You try to conform to fit in, to be normal. But the psychological strain is enormous. Jung observed that people in this stage often develop what he called persona rigidity. They become so focused on appearing normal that they lose touch with their authentic selves. Stage 2. The awakening individual. You begin to recognize your traits as potentially valuable rather than problematic. You start to understand Jung's concept of psychological types and see where you fit. You begin the process of what Jung called shadow integration, owning the parts of yourself you've been taught to reject. This is where you stop apologizing for your depth and start owning it. You begin to set boundaries with people who want to dim your light. You start seeking out others who can match your level of authenticity. Stage 3. The individuated consciousness. You fully integrated your rare traits into a coherent identity. You understand your purpose and live it consciously. You've developed what Jung called psychological wholeness, the ability to be authentically yourself while remaining connected to others. At this stage, you become what I call a beacon for other rare souls. You don't just live authentically. You give others permission to do the same. You become a catalyst for collective consciousness evolution. If you're ready to stop hiding your rare traits and start owning them completely, comment, "I am psychologically rare and proud." But Jung warned about something crucial that most people with rare personalities never learn. You must integrate your shadow or your gifts become your prison. What do I mean by this? Even rare personalities have unconscious aspects that can sabotage their growth. Jung identified several shadow patterns common to psychologically advanced individuals. The superiority complex, shadow. You begin to see your rarity as evidence that you're better than others, rather than simply different. This leads to isolation and arrogance, the messianic shadow. You become convinced that it's your job to wake up or heal everyone around you. This leads to burnout and resentment when others don't appreciate your efforts. The martyrdom shadow. You begin to believe that being rare means being destined to suffer, that your depth requires sacrifice of happiness or connection. Jung understood that shadow integration is essential for psychological health. The goal isn't to eliminate these tendencies, but to make them conscious so they don't unconsciously control your behavior. True psychological rarity includes the wisdom to know when to share your gifts and when to preserve them, when to lead and when to follow, when to speak truth and when to remain silent. Jung made a profound observation about rare personalities in relationships. They either attract people who want to possess their light or people who are threatened by it. Understanding this pattern is crucial for building authentic connections. The light seekers. These are people who are unconsciously drawn to your energy but haven't done their own inner work. They want you to be their therapist, their guru, their source of meaning. They love your gifts, but not necessarily you as a complete person. The light dimmer. These are people who feel threatened by your intensity and constantly try to get you to tone down, be more reasonable, or stop making everything so complicated. They're often unconsciously triggered by your authenticity because it highlights their own inauthenticity. The light matcher. These are the rare individuals who have done their own psychological work and can meet you at your level of depth without needing to consume or diminish you. They celebrate your rarity while maintaining their own psychological sovereignty. Jung discovered something beautiful about rare personalities who learn to navigate relationships consciously. They become mirrors that help others see their own potential for psychological development. The key is learning what Jung called psychological discrimination. The ability to discern who is capable of authentic relationship and who is seeking something else from you. But here's what Jung understood that changes everything. With psychological rarity comes responsibility. You're not just different for your own benefit. You're different in service of human evolution. Jung believed that individuals with rare personalities serve as bridges between the unconscious and conscious realms of human experience. Through your depth, your questions, your refusal to accept shallow answers, you help humanity grow. This is why you can't settle for ordinary. This is why surface-level connections feel empty. This is why you'd rather be alone than pretend. Your psyche knows you have work to do, and that work requires authenticity, depth, and courage. But Jung also warned about what I call psychological inflation, the danger of believing that being rare makes you superior rather than simply responsible. The key is holding both humility and power. Understanding that you're special without believing others are less valuable. Your sensitivity isn't a weakness to be managed. It's intelligence to be applied. Your intensity isn't too much. It's exactly what certain situations require. Your refusal to settle isn't difficult. It's necessary for the evolution of consciousness. Jung made a startling prediction about rare personalities. As humanity evolves, more people will develop these traits. What's rare now will become more common as our species grows in psychological sophistication. But that means you're not just personally rare. You're evolutionarily important. You represent what Jung called the leading edge of human consciousness, your pioneering ways of being that others will eventually follow. This perspective changes everything about how you see your struggles. Every time you felt like an outsider, you were actually scouting new territory for human potential. Every time you've been criticized for being too much, you are demonstrating possibilities that threaten limited worldviews. Every time you've chosen authenticity over acceptance, you've expanded what's possible for human relationship. Every time you've refused to settle for shallow meaning, you've raised the bar for what life can become. Jung understood that psychological evolution happens through individuals like you who refuse to accept current limitations as permanent. You're not just living your life, you're expanding what it means to be human. But this comes with loneliness. You're often walking paths that few others have walked. You're solving problems that most people don't even recognize as problems. You're seeking connections that most people don't believe are possible. Jung's final insight about rare personalities was both challenging and liberating. You must learn to love your rarity without needing others to understand it. The goal isn't to make everyone see how special you are. The goal is to embody your gift so fully that you become a living example of what's possible when someone embraces their authentic nature completely. This means accepting that some people will never understand your depth. Some will be threatened by your questions. Some will want to diminish your light because it makes them uncomfortable with their own dimness. But Jung discovered something beautiful about people who fully embrace their psychological rarity. They become magnets for others who are ready to embrace their own uniqueness. You don't need everyone to understand you. You need to find the few who can match your level of consciousness and build a life with them. The world needs your questions, your sensitivity, your refusal to accept limitations as permanent. But you must give these gifts consciously, strategically, sustainably. You must learn to be both powerful and protective, both open and discerning. Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. You're learning to do exactly that. And in doing so, you're giving others permission to accept themselves completely too." Remember what Jung identified about extremely rare personalities. The 8 signs we've explored aren't just individual traits. They're evidence of what I call advanced psychological architecture. Jung wrote in his final works, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But for people like you, becoming who you truly are means accepting that you operate at a level of psychological sophistication that most people never develop. Your emotional depth isn't oversensitivity. It's emotional intelligence, operating at advanced levels. Your constant questioning isn't negativity. It's consciousness refusing to accept limitations. Your independence isn't isolation. It's psychological sovereignty. Your hyper-pive awareness isn't paranoia. It's intuition functioning as intended. Your craving for meaning isn't impractical. It's your soul demanding alignment. Your pattern of outgrowing people isn't coldness. It's evolution in action. Your transformational presence isn't manipulation. It's authenticity, creating space for truth. Your undefined purpose isn't confusion. It's potential seeking expression. If even half of these signs resonated with you, you're not just different. You're part of what Jung believed was humanity's next evolutionary step. You're one of the people pushing our species toward greater awareness, deeper truth, and more authentic connection. Yes, it's lonely sometimes. Yes, it requires more courage than most people will ever need. But Jung believed that people like you are essential for humanity's psychological evolution. Your intensity isn't too much. It's exactly what the world needs to shake off its comfortable numbness. Your sensitivity isn't weakness. It's strength that can perceive what others miss. Your refusal to settle isn't difficult. It's necessary for progress. Carl Jung spent his life studying people like you because he understood something profound. You're not just living your own life. You're expanding what it means to be human. The world doesn't need you to be smaller, quieter, or more convenient. The world needs you to be exactly what you are, psychologically rare and proud of it. If you're ready to fully embrace your psychological rarity and stop apologizing for traits that make you extraordinary, comment below. I am evolutionary consciousness in human form. Share this with someone who needs to remember their own psychological rarity. And if you want to understand more about Jung's insights into the shadow side of sensitivity, check out my video on Final Warning to Empaths, They're Feeding on Your Light, where I reveal Jung's most disturbing discovery about how unconscious people drain the energy of psychologically advanced individuals. Subscribe, because we're just beginning to explore the depths of what makes you extraordinary. Remember, you're not too much. The world is too little. And Jung knew that people like you are the ones who change that. Thank you for watching. See you in the next dimension.